Let's continue our exploration of the image restoration category inside of BorisFX Continuum. If you're following along, there are 3 clips in a timeline called 7B. And what we're going to do is start off by looking at Beauty Studio. I'll head to the Effect palette and let's go to the image restoration category. And the first thing we'd like to do to this clip here is perform a little bit of beauty correction to the subject here on the left-hand side. Now, in order to do that, we're going to use Beauty Studio. So look for BCC plus Beauty Studio, and let's drag that onto the clip here in the timeline. If I go into effect mode, let's zoom in, and I will also press Command Option in order to move the subject to the center of the frame. I'm just going to bypass this effect so you can see the layer of digital makeup that has been applied to her skin. The problem is it's not only applied to her skin, you could probably see as I click this bypass on and off that it's also affecting the rocks in the background. So we would like this to be isolated a little bit better, not to mention have more control over how intense this effect is. I'll keep us zoomed in at this amount. And first thing we could do is to choose which pixels are affected in the image by adjusting the matte. So I'm going to go to the matte section, and you'll notice here that we have a color A and a color B that are automatically set based on certain skin tones. I'm going to bypass the effect because I want to get the original pixels. Click color A and sample it from my subject, and then click color B, sample another color from the subject, and now that matte has been adjusted. You do have a control. If I turn off bypass, we can now see the effect. And we can also view the matte, and that's the selection of our color A and B, as well as see all of the other pixels outside of what we want that are currently selected. So we could start to adjust the hue softness, saturation softness, and luma softness to perfect this a bit. In fact, I can get rid of the male subject there, the side, by adjusting that in the black and white clip level. And one of the other things we can do is just blur this matte a bit so it's a bit smoother when we start to make adjustments to the digital makeup. Now that that's done, I'll change the view back to output so that we can see this clearer. And let's focus on the smoothing. So I'll zoom in once again, then pan the image, Command and Option. Let's bring down the master amount a bit so the digital makeup isn't so strong, and then play with the different levels of detail that we have here. So one thing we could do is bring down the smallest details and small details quite a bit. I find myself many times when adjusting here to try to make sure that it doesn't feel like there's too much makeup, dialing both smallest details and small details down quite a bit. We could also adjust the medium, large, and largest details. And by the way, there are different quality settings we have with Beauty Studio as well. So if I go to precise, I can also choose levels of detail, which would add more layers of digital application to our subject. But let's settle on 3 and having the quality set to precise, but with a longer render. Okay, the detail levels actually refers to the sliders above. When we set the detail levels to 4, this is going to affect the large details. If we set the detail levels to 5, the largest details would also be available to us. Now, going back to the View Matte Mask and zooming out, we still have a lot of unwanted pixels in this shot, which we don't want to become affected. And this is where you can use Mocha to help us and a shape mask in order to isolate it just to this woman's face. So let's turn off the matte and just go back to output. And in this case, I'll twirl up the smoothing settings, head to the Mocha mask and track, and let's go to Mocha mask. Here, I'll play back the clip. And we can see that there's some position as well as rotation with the camera here. So let's now add some shapes. I'm going to select the magnetic spline tool and try to select around the contours of her face, which does a pretty great job. In this case, I'm just clicking at areas around her face and her ears, and I'll double click on the first point in order to close it. Keep in mind that we can select If there are too many points in this case, we can click on one of them and delete them. I'll also press Command A to select all of them and drag them in as well. We don't need skew to be involved with the track under the layer here. So we'll track translation, scale, and rotation. And let me track forward first. We can see how that does. And I'll go back to the first point where I created the mask and track backward. So if I play this back, this mask does a pretty good job of sticking to the subject in this case. And there's just a couple things to note here. One is I'd prefer to not have the eyes affected, not to mention her lips. And this is where we could add some subtractive masks to this so they're not included in what we export out to Avid. In order to see this, I'm just going to go and select the X plus tool. And this is going to add to my selected layer rather than create a new mask altogether. So I'm just going to click and drag with the X-spline tool. In fact, also I'll press the Z key and then zoom in with my mouse. Of course, I could use X to pan around the image here in Mocha. I'll double click to close that shape. I'm going to now repeat this X-spline tool, still selected. I'll select the X plus tool, now make a shape around the subject's eyes in this case. Select it one more time and add yet another shape, knowing that she does blink, but in this case, we're not concerned with that movement. We're just concerned with not affecting the eye when it's completely open. And in order to visualize this inside of Mocha, we want to go to the View menu, over to Mats, and then just choose Mats. And you'll see that we've now created holes in our original mask. And you might be able to see also we need to make just a few adjustments so we perfect where it is around her face. That's looking pretty good. I'll adjust the eye mask a bit so it's a bit tighter and not around her skin. And to see how this is going to look inside of Mocha, I'm just going to close this out and choose Save. Now, I'll zoom into the image as well as pan, where we can take a close look at bypassing and seeing that the only effects taking place are on the subject's face and nowhere else. To see the Mocha mask, we do have to go into Pixel Chooser and view the matte mask there. So there's the shape mask. Let's go into the mask settings like we did in an earlier movie and then just smooth this out. And this will work in combination with our skin mask that's included inside of Beauty Studio. So I will deselect that mask and then just bypass this on and off, twirl this up, and let's just finalize this by adding more skin here. I'm going to go back into Mocha Mask, and let's call the layer that we've been working with Face. And since we want also her neck and some of her body here also to be affected, I'll select the X-spline tool and draw a new mask shape around this area, attaching this layer's tracking information to the main face mask and making adjustments along the way for where it shifts. A little bit of overlap will be okay. I'll double click to close the mask, call this neck, and make sure under the layer properties, like we saw in an earlier movie, the link to track is actually set to the face. And from here, I'll just play this back and look for any drift in the second mask. And with that magic of Mocha and the ability to just adjust keyframes without affecting the actual track and having to do this on every frame, goes a long way for us when it comes to working with Beauty Studio. I'll exit out of Mocha, save it, and see now how Beauty Studio is not only affecting the shape, but if I view the matte mask, also here her neck and part of her body here that I've defined. I'll bypass that so we can see that one more time. Let's look at another image restoration example where we use BCC Remover to remove a spot on a person's face. So from the same image restoration category, let's choose BCC Remover, and we'll automatically see its impact on our shot. But when we head into effect mode, we get two on-screen controls. The green circle stands for where you're going to clone to. So this is the destination, and the red circle is where you're cloning from. Now let's actually change the spot offset clone method to absolute. It's going to move or shift the red circle, but come in handy when we head over to Mocha for tracking, as in if I move through this shot, it's moving. Now I'll go to the source center here and just scale that down a little bit. And note that you have a couple controls that you could take advantage of, different removal methods, some that use Pixel Chooser, and then controls for how the clone is applied. So in addition to the radius and the feather, where we have on-screen controls for that, we've got clone color, detail size, and brightness that we can take advantage of. So in using Mocha, we want to go to the bottom of the effect, and under Motion Tracker Mocha, let's launch the Motion Tracker. Inside, we're going to see a folder with two layers, the destination and the clone source that we've already set up. If we need to make any refinement here, we can of course move that, and that's going to translate over to Avid, which I'll do with the destination here. And once that's set up, in taking a look at the head movement, I can see that there's some rotation. So in keeping that in mind, we'll track translation, scale, and rotation. Let me track forward from the original point, and I'll go back to the point where I started tracking, and now I'll track backward. Let's play this back to see the results and see that we have a successful track with that rotation movement there at the end. And we'll close out Mocha and not forget to save and see how this now translates over into Avid. So I'll just play this back. We can see that those points travel away, and that area that we wanted to has been successfully cloned out. In order to see it without the overlays, I'll just exit that mode so we can see the clone a bit more clearer. And then, knowing that it is a bit noticeable, play around with the feather after the fact, and then take a look at that change made with the removed area. Now let's go to the third and last shot here in the timeline, which happens to be a 9:16 clip that was imported at its regular size into this 1920x1080 sequence. What we're going to want to do is play around with something called Reframer, which will give us several options for how to frame this image in this sequence. Okay, so I am going to grab Reframer here from the image restoration category, apply it to the third shot in my timeline, and then open up the effects mode, where we have a bunch of different options in how we utilize this. In this case, we're going to make sure that the background layer is set to none. And let's first of all go into foreground transforms. What I'm going to do is scale this down, and you'll notice the exact same plate here in the background, but blurred out. So we could take that, and we can also, in this case, because it's 9:16, rotate it. This case, let's make it a -90 exactly. And if we wanted to put a number of effects here on the foreground as well, like a foreground blur, or turn on some color correction in order to make this pop a bit more from the background plate. Now, the same effects that are available to us in the foreground transforms, and the foreground effects are also available in the background setup. And now you can see it's currently set to source, but we could use an alternative source. We've got our background transforms, and maybe in this case, I do want to rotate it like the original clip so that it's -90, but then play around with its scale master so it fits the raster of the 1920x1080 sequence. I'll close out those, and then let's just take a look at the effects. I could, of course, decrease the blur, or alternatively, try another effect like mosaic, or in this case, I'll just turn the color correction on, and under that, head to the saturation and lower it quite a bit. So you can see how Reframer could be great for taking social media content and putting it into your 1920 or Ultra HD rasters. You could do the exact opposite with Ultra HD clips, trying to fit them into a 9:16 sequence if required. So that takes us through image restoration. We started off in part A looking at the machine learning tools, and continued by looking at Beauty Studio, Remover, and Reframer. All of these tools can provide you with a ton of options inside of Avid Media Composer.